We've had a kind of a long, dry summer, haven't we? Until just recently, we got some rain, but I know through most of the summer, we were experiencing a drought in this area. And it had an effect even on the churches. I don't know if you're aware of that, but the Baptists in the Church of Christ started sprinkling. The Episcopalians were using wet wipes. The Presbyterians and Lutherans were giving out rain checks. And the Catholics were praying for the wine to be turned back into water. That's how bad it was. But thank goodness we've gotten some rain here recently. And thank goodness for this church that hosts us. And they cover all their bases. They have the little sprinkling baptismal font over here and the dunking one right outside, and they use both. So I hope everybody feels at home in this place. I do. As we get started, though, and as I welcome you to Mary Ministries and recognize that there's a lot of new people here, I just want to briefly tell you a little bit of what we are, because we're an interdenominational Christian Bible study. And our three core things are biblical knowledge. That's where it all starts, right here in the Word. Practical application. Let's put it into practice. And then changed lives. The result of that biblical knowledge and that practical application is it changes our lives. And not only have we seen many lives changed here, but lives of families changed as well. So with that, let's go to the Lord in prayer and get started. Oh, Father God, we praise you and we give you thanks for this day. Our prayer is that as we unpack this study, is that our hearts would be open to the wisdom and the knowledge given in your word, and that our minds would be open to the practical application we see there. May we not read this superficially, but may we grow in a deep desire to live a life according to the wisdom given in this book. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now, as you all know, we live in the information age. We have so much information at our very fingertips. Never in the history of the world has there been this much information so easily accessible. Everything from personal information to global information to information about galaxies now that are billions and billions of light years away, and it's all at our fingertips on our smartphones. And not only do we have smartphones, we have smart cars. Well, my car's not that smart, but hopefully the next one will be a little smarter. But through our cars, not only do we have GPS, but cars now can show you your blind spots, that there's a car in your blind spot, keep you in your lane, automatically brake if you get too close to something. Some cars even drive themselves and park themselves. I want one of those cars. But our cars are getting smarter. Our homes are getting smarter with smart lights, smart security systems, smart appliances. Smart sprinkler systems. We got a new sprinkler system a year and a half or so ago, and it is in communication with the weather station to know what the temperature is going to be and if the yard needs to be watered that day or not. I mean, in this age where everything is changing, we are getting more and more information, we obviously must be the very smartest people in the history of the world. Right? Wrong. Wrong. Information plus knowledge does not equal wisdom. What wisdom is, what it is, that's what we're going to be looking at. And how do we get it? How do we acquire it? Some would say that wisdom is the appropriate application of knowledge. But wisdom is really so much more than that. And it's one of those qualities that's difficult to define, but when you see wisdom in another person, you usually recognize it. Psychologists tend to agree that wisdom involves an integration of knowledge, experience, and deep understanding, as well as a tolerance for the uncertainties of life. How many of you have had, and you don't have to raise your hand, some uncertainties pop up in your life the last year or two? Well, wisdom can help you, and it's based on those things: knowledge, experience, understanding. But let me ask again, how do we acquire wisdom? Where do we find it? Well, here in Mary Ministries, our study source is called the Bible. That's our textbook, and that's where we turn for wisdom. Now, we've been in the Bible a few years already, and we've studied the Torah. That's the first 5 books of the Bible, also referred to as the books of Moses or the books of law or the Pentateuch. And so that's the basis of the Old Testament and really sets the tone for the whole Bible. Then we covered the books of history. So the Torah was the first 5 books. Then Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Then we get to the books of history that start with Joshua and go through Esther. Now we are in the wisdom literature, and then we'll get to the prophets later this year. So in the wisdom literature, that's where we are right now. And there are 5 books that are in this section of the Bible. They're all poetic, and it starts with Job, goes to Psalms, and that's where we ended last year with our study of Psalms. Then Proverbs, that's what we're starting today, followed by Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon, also called the Song of Songs. So as we begin this new semester, I like to call it, this is Solomon's Trilogy. And who doesn't like a good trilogy, right? So he wrote these 3 books, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And Proverbs is a book on practical living. Ecclesiastes on purposeful living. And Song of Solomon is on passionate loving. So as we go through these, it's thought that the Song of Solomon was written when Solomon was young and in love, and that Ecclesiastes was written when he was older and feeling like, I've tried everything and it's all meaningless, because he had gotten off track. But it's thought that Proverbs was written in the prime of his life, in the years of his life when the nation was thriving, which was most of his life, and when life was good and he was on track. Now, we could look at these and think, well, these are so old. Do they really apply to us today? But I think if you've been reading through these, like I've encouraged you to do through the emails, and some of you aren't on my email yet, but it's to take a proverb a day and read it. So like this morning, I got up, I read Proverbs 7. Tomorrow I'll read Proverbs 8, because tomorrow's the 8th. And if you've been going through that, and we started that in August, and then continued in September, that will help you. If you're reading this ahead of time, it will help you in your understanding of it as I go through it, because we're not going to cover every single verse. We just don't have time for that. But you'll be able to pick up and track pretty well with me. But these are not just old sayings. These are universal principles. They're not prophecies. They're not promises, and I'll talk about that a little later. But let's look, as I always love, I love to introduce a new book of the Bible. And I love to go through the who, what, when, where, why questions. So who? I've already said it, it's Solomon. But who is Solomon? Well, he's the main author. The last 2 chapters are written by a couple of other guys, looks like. We'll get to that at the end of the month. But he is the son of King David and Bathsheba. He is the 3rd king of Israel's united monarchy. So there was Saul, who ruled for 40 years, followed by David, Solomon's father, who ruled for 40 years, followed by Solomon, who rules for 40 years. After that, it turns into a hot mess, okay? The nation divides, there's a civil war, and 2 nations come out of that. But he is the one who is writing this. And when he first became king, he was making an altar. The temple hadn't been built, but there was an altar, and he was making a sacrifice and praying to God. And God said to Solomon, ask anything that you want, and I will give it to you. Now, that's the only blank check God's ever given out in the Bible. And Solomon answered, he said, I would ask for wisdom that I might rule your people wisely. So God was so pleased with that answer. He said, not only will I give you wisdom, but I will give you material wealth. I will give you power. I will give you fame. And so the fame of Solomon spread throughout the known world. And dignitaries, kings and queens, world leaders would come to see him, to see his great palace, to see God's great temple, and to ask him questions and riddles. 1 Kings 4 tells us that he had more wisdom than anyone in the world. It tells us that he was that he had more wisdom than there was sand on the seashore. That he knew about botany, biology, zoology, and that he wrote 3,000 proverbs. We don't have them all, and 1,005 songs. So he was prolific in so many areas. When the Queen of Sheba came to meet him and quiz him and view all of what he had, she said, not even the half has been told of how great this kingdom is and how great he is. So that's Solomon. So what? What is the what? Well, this is Solomon's Twitter feed. These short, pithy little statements. Okay, I'm kidding. This is a book, as we've talked about. It's in the wisdom section of the Bible. It is also a work of poetry. And in that, we're going to see 4 different types of parallelism. 2 of them mainly, and so I'll just touch on those very briefly. Synonymous parallelism. Synonymous means much like the same, and that's where the second line of these 2-line little quips restates or builds on the first or completes the thought of the first line. The other type is antithetical parallelism, and that's where the second line contrasts the first line. Like the righteous shall prosper, but the wicked be condemned. Okay, see how one contrasts the other. That's antithetical. So I'll point out a little of that as we go from time to time, but I'm not going to dwell on it. When was this written? During Solomon's reign, which was 970 BC to 930 BC. So we go from bigger numbers to smaller numbers in BC, remember. Where was it written? Probably in Jerusalem. That's where his palace was. But he did have another palace at Megiddo, and he did kind of make the rounds around the country, but we're going to say Jerusalem for the most part. Why did he write it? To give instruction on practical wisdom for living. Now, as I mentioned, we finished last year with Psalms, and that was written mostly by his father David. And the Psalms are a book that is maybe best read on our knees because it's full of prayers. It's full of worship. It's full of praise. But we cannot live 24/7 on our knees, can we? And so we get to the book of Proverbs, and that's best read on our feet, ready to take action, ready to do what we've prayed about. And so that's where we are, ready to live out what we've prayed. Let's go. Chapter 1 of Proverbs, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And then we get into the purpose, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So we're going to spend a little more time on chapter 1 than the other chapters today. But what we see in here and throughout this book are 3 key verbs or key nouns that are repeated throughout this book. It begins with wise and wisdom. They're from the same Hebrew root word. And you see in verse 2, wisdom. Verse 5, wise. Verse 3 wise. Verse 5, wise. Verse 6, wise. So we see a lot of wisdom right off the bat. And the word wise or wisdom shows up 100 times in the Proverbs. That's a lot, people. Then we get to the word knowledge. We see knowledge here in the first few verses, 4 and then in 7. And knowledge shows up 40 times in the Proverbs. We'll talk in a minute about the difference between the two. Then we get to, look at verse 7. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Fools. So fools, and foolish are going to show up 69 times in Proverbs. And we're going to see the contrast over and over between the wise and the foolish. And so with all of this, and a lot of it, most of it starts right here. I want to remind you, we don't check our brains at the door and just walk in and say, oh, all I need is faith. No, we need knowledge. We need to know what God's Word says so that we can grow in our faith and live out our faith. So be thinking. I see a lot of, like all of y'all are very wise, intelligent women. And you're just going to grow more through this study of Proverbs. So it's written, we see in these first few verses, directed primarily to 4 main groups of people. First of all, the simple, mentioned there in verse 4, to give prudence to the simple. Who are the simple? Well, they are people who are naive, inexperienced, ignorant. That's not stupid, just not knowledgeable. And the simple are going to be contrasted with the youth in verse 4, who are also naive and inexperienced, but the simple are not necessarily still youth. They've grown up, they're adults, but they're still kind of simple-minded, okay? The youth are naive, inexperienced. Verse 5 talks about the wise. Let the wise hear and increase in learning. That's you guys. And the wise are people who have learned from experience how to distinguish what is true and good from what is false and bad. And then the foolish. That shows up in verse 7, the end of it. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The foolish are those that have rejected the fear of the Lord, the first part of that verse. They reject the fear of the Lord. They reject wisdom and instruction. So this foolish refers to a person who is morally corrupt rather than intellectually limited. All right? It's by choice that they are making these foolish decisions. Now, the overriding theme of this book is in verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And so with that, we see that's our starting point. The fear of the Lord is our most basic key ingredient in getting wisdom. All wisdom and knowledge depends on God. And in the godly sense, we must submit to His will. And so verse 7 is the absolute key to this, the fear of the Lord. At the end of this section, this first section, I hope you have the outline if you didn't get it on the way out, but the first 9 chapters are like a father talking to his son, giving instruction, and at the end of it, it's kind of repeated again. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of, and the second of it says wisdom, because those two are closely tied together. We cannot know how to live day to day, day in, day out in our lives without understanding the fear of the Lord. And some of you may be going, yeah, I'd like to understand that a little better. What does it look like? Well, it's repeated over and over in this book in particular. The fear of the Lord appears 14 times in Proverbs and almost 27 times in the entire Bible. In addition to that, we are commanded to fear the Lord twice in Proverbs and 32 times in the rest of the Bible. So it shows up over and over, like in Psalm 34:9. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints, for those who fear him have no lack. So in the Old Testament and the New, saints are those people who are believers in God. And in the New Testament, believers in the Son of God, Jesus. But what does that mean to fear the Lord? Let's look at the Hebrew word for it. It's yirah in Hebrew. The Old Testament, remember, the Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek because by New Testament times that was the main language in that whole part of the world. The Old Testament Hebrew, the word is yirah. It means a couple of things: fear, terror, dread. But it also means fear like of God, awe, respect, reverence. So we see two realities here in tension. And many times when fear is used in the Bible, it is like a trembling fear, like your enemies will fear you. But other times it is this reverent awe of God. So what we need to do is minimize that terror and dread aspect and focus on the reverence and respect as believers of God. God is holy. God is righteous. He's not just going to take sin and sweep it under the table. He will deal with it. But when we reverence him, when we respect him, it is an experience of true awe. Now, I've been noticing lately how beautiful the sunsets have been around here. Has anyone else been seeing some of these beautiful sunsets we've been having? And when I look at that, I am in awe of God. Now, I'm not scared. It doesn't scare me. It makes me respect and reverence all that he has created. And many people are drawn to God through nature, through creation, through what they see. And so that brings an awe in that way, but there are many ways that we are drawn to God. So what should our posture, our position be before God if we are to have the fear of the Lord? Well, when we look in the Bible and we see Moses before the burning bush, when we see Joshua before the commander of the Lord's army, I mean, they are like falling on their face. They have a trembling fear, but it's in respect and reverence. Isaiah, who will be studying his book later this year, has a vision of God, and he is like, woe is me. John, in the last book of the Bible, Revelation, has the vision of Jesus Christ, and he falls on his face. So it is an awesome experience to experience God. So we see these two aspects, these two sides of the same coin, and we, it recalls to me, raising kids, that I wanted them to respect me. I wanted them to follow the rules of our house, obey, keep the rules. But if they didn't, And if they were coming home at 12:30 when they were supposed to be home at 12, I wanted them trembling on the way home. I wanted a little fear of the Lord and of Mama in them. Because I love them, and we want our kids to grow up doing the right thing. And so that's God. He wants us to do the right thing. So we experience the fear of the Lord, and the best way to experience it is by respecting Him and His guidelines for us, because they're for our good and His glory. The fear of the Lord shows faith. Genesis 22 is a story that tells us about Abraham being told by God, now take your son, your only son, whom you love, take him up on Mount Moriah and sacrifice him there. And so Abraham takes Isaac. They go up the mountain. He's laid on the altar. He's about to bring down the knife when God says, stop. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear the Lord, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. We see the fear of the Lord mentioned throughout the Old Testament, but we also see it in the New Testament. 2 Corinthians 7:1 says, since we have these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear of God. Now, the New Testament word for fear in the Greek is phobos, and that's where we get the phobias, all right? It's from the Greek. But some of you may be thinking, yeah, but doesn't it say somewhere in the Bible that God doesn't want us to have a spirit of fear? Well, let's look at that. That's 2 Timothy 1:7. It says, for God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. So is that at conflict? No. But what you have to do is go back and look at the Greek. The word for fear here is not phobos. It is delia in Greek, and it means timidity, lack of courage. So God is saying, I don't want you to be timid. I don't want you to be a coward. I want you to be brave. And so we see, and that's the only place that word delia shows up in the entire Bible, is that one place. So understanding the fear of the Lord is first and foremost acknowledging that He is God, we're not, having the correct attitude of the believer, that is one of awe, deep respect, servitude, and humility before a holy and righteous God. Then we get to the next section here of chapter 1, verse 8. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. So right here in verse 8, we see that both the father and the mother are responsible for the training and the education of the children. The first and most important classroom is in the home. And the most important teachers are the parents. It is their responsibility to see to the training and the education of their children. And it's the child's responsibility to listen and to learn. This tradition goes back, it didn't just start here in Proverbs, it goes back to the Torah. And in Deuteronomy 6, we see this beginning in verse 1. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. So Moses is writing this because as they're getting ready to go into the promised land. Verse 2, so that you, your children, and their children after them may, what? Fear the Lord your God as long as you live, keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, so that you may enjoy long life. Verse 4. Hear, O Israel. And these next few verses are known as the Shema, or the Shema prayer. Shema is Hebrew for hear. And many Jews will say this prayer every day, some 3 times a day. Hear, O Israel. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your heart. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. So Solomon had obviously been brought up with this kind of training from his father and mother, and he is passing it on, but we see that this is a long-standing law for the Jewish people, and it should be for us too, to teach our kids. Teach them God's will and God's way, God's words. When they get up, when they go throughout their day, when they go to bed, it should be an ongoing thing, not a one and done. Did you get it? Go. It's an ongoing act. Then in this next part, and I'm going to move quicker here, verses 10 through 19 of chapter 1, basically it says, shun evil, run from it. Don't let sinners entice you to do evil. They will swallow you up alive, it says, and send you to Sheol. That's another name for the grave. Don't take their path, which leads to evil and self-destruction. Then in verses 20 through 27, it talks about wisdom cries out loudly with words of knowledge. So look at verse 20. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets, she raises her voice. And so we're going to see periodically throughout this, as wisdom is spoken of in Proverbs, it's referred to as a woman. And I think that's because we're the smartest. But it's in female terms here. She's, it says, and it goes on and talks about, like, look at verse 22. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? This is wisdom speaking. How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? So what we see here is a breakdown of 3 kinds of fools: the simple fool, the scoffing fool, and the stubborn fool. So let's look at the simple fool again here. Oh, simple ones, will you love being simple? Well, now, some Bibles translate that as naive or as ignorant, not stupid, ignorant. And that's kind of where we all start out in life. But the root of this Hebrew word for simple means like an open door. And in Proverbs 14, we're going to see the prudent gives thought to his steps, but the simple believes everything. So this tells us the simple isn't a stupid person. This isn't a person who doesn't know anything. It's a person who knows everything. They are a know-it-all, okay? Do you know anybody like that? They know it before you can tell them. They know everything. They believe everything they hear. They fall for anything, whatever the newest trend or thing or teaching is. They're all in it. They want to know about that, but they don't really stick to anything, and so they're called the simple fool here. Then we have the scoffing fool. It says, how long will scoffers delight in their scoffing? Well, now, this kind of a fool doesn't just want to do his own thing, his own wrong thing. He wants to stir up trouble for other people. Proverbs 22 says, drive out a scoffer, and strife will go out, and quarreling and abuse will cease. Now, have you ever been in a group and there was just a lot of peace and love and good times, and then this one person shows up and everybody's like, uh-oh, there she is. And the whole tone changes because this person begins quarreling or overriding what others are saying. when they're around, it just kind of puts people on edge. And so we don't want to be a scoffer. It says they delight in scoffing. And they want to have the last word. Then we have the stubborn fool. The end of verse 22 says, and fools hate knowledge. That's the stubborn fool. We look back at what David wrote in Psalm 14. He says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Now that's pretty stubborn and pretty foolish. But he's different than the simple-minded. The stubborn fool knows deep down in his heart, yeah, there is a God, but he willfully ignores God and just lives for himself. He doesn't care what's good or bad. All it matters to him is what's in it for me. Proverbs 15 describes this kind of fool as a fool that despises his father's instruction. But truly, if you're a stubborn fool, you despise pretty much anybody's instruction. You don't want to be told how to do things. You want to do it your way. You don't want to read the instruction manual till you get so far into it that you have to. The simple fool can't tell the difference between right and wrong, but the stubborn fool takes pride in doing things their own way, even if that's wrong. And so we are going to see these three types of fools pop up throughout our study of Proverbs. Let's look at verse 28, though. Then they will call upon me, and I will not answer. What? These fools won't, God's not going to answer these fools? He says, they will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge, and they did not choose the fear of the Lord, and would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. So he's saying, yeah, they're calling on me when it's too late, after I've told them over and over and over what they need to do. And they've rejected me over and over and over. Verse 32, it ends on a good note. But whoever listens to me will dwell and be secure, and will be at ease without dread of disaster. So even these foolish people, though, I'm going to say, can turn to God. Stop rejecting him, and he will listen to them. But if they're going to hang on hard and fast to what they want to do, then he's going to reject their ideas and say, okay, you've chosen, rather than the fear of the Lord, you've chosen the fruit of your own way, which is the way of destruction. Okay, chapter 2, this is a book about the moral benefits of wisdom, a chapter about it. My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So there's the key. Receive God's word, seek him, have the fear of the Lord, that reverence for him, call out for wisdom, seek it like a treasure. And really, the best things in life are not material things. They are the spiritual things and the gifts from God. And so you ask for wisdom. James tells us this. If you ask for wisdom, God will freely give it to you. I mean, some of us, he's going to say, hey, I thought you'd never ask. Yeah, I can tell you what you need to do. I can guide you along the way. Just ask. This goes on to talk about more about wisdom, knowledge, discretion, understanding. and how God will deliver us from the way of evil by these things. In verse 16 it says, so you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. We're going to see a lot about the adulterous person in these chapters as well, and the temptation that comes along with this. Verse 20, so you will walk in the way of the good and keep to the paths of the righteous. We're going to see a lot about two paths in Proverbs. There's the good path and the bad path. There's the foolish path and the wise path. And so we'll see that analogy brought up repeatedly. The wicked will be cut off from the land, and the treacherous will be rooted out of it. Then we get to chapter 3. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For the length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Now, again, these are general principles. They're not promises, they're not prophecies, but they're general principles that are reliable. We're going to see that and you can just look around the world today and see that there are exceptions to these in the world, but in general, these things really do help you live a longer, stronger, more peaceful life if you stick to God's way of doing things. Verse 3, let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Wear them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Solomon loves to use a lot of imagery in this, as he points out that like this love and faithfulness are like a pretty necklace, and so write it on your heart, you know. And so we have a little visual of how he's thinking of this. Verse 4, so you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. And then we come, and I'm going to read it first in the English Standard Version. And a lot of people always ask, well, what translation do you use? And any one that you want to use is good, but I use the English because that's the only language I can speak. But use whatever works for you. Okay, but I'm going to read it first in the ESV, then we're going to look at it in another translation. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Wow, I bet a lot of you already have memorized that because it's a famous passage. It's my favorite 2 verses in this whole book. I love it. And it just reminds me how trust in God, not with half my heart, not half-heartedly, but with wholeheartedly, with all my heart. I need to trust him and lean on not my understanding, but his ways, his understanding, and to acknowledge him. Then it goes on to say, be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Boy, we're seeing fear the Lord a lot, aren't we? Didn't I tell you that? Yeah, it's all over this. But it will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Now I want to take a look at it in the Message, which is a more contemporary paraphrase. Trust God from the very bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do. Do you know that means you have to be quiet? How many of you have something turned on all the time? The TV's turned on, the radios or the podcast is turned on, or the, music's playing, and we don't just stop and be still and be quiet. But it says, listen for God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. Don't assume you know it all. Run to God, run from evil. And then he says, your body will glow with health, and your very bones will vibrate with life. Amen. Awesome. I encourage you to memorize at least verses 5 and 6 in whatever translation you choose. Then it goes on in verse 9 to say, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. Okay, so the giving of the first fruits is a principle that goes back to the Torah, the first books, the books of law, where God tells his people, and it's mainly an agrarian society, so they've got crops. He says, take the first fruits, the first part of your crops when you harvest it, and offer it to God. That's what you do first. And so that principle, and then later it's called tithing, is given. And what we see is that we give God the first of what we have, not our leftovers. It's like, I got my paycheck. I'm going to see how much I have left at the end of the month before I can determine how much I need to give God. That's not a biblical principle. It's like, give God first, and you'll have plenty. Personally, I can say that I know that 90% goes farther than 100%. So, it's a principle that is throughout the Bible, and he's encouraging them to do that. Verse 11, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof, for the Lord reproves him who he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights. We see this principle that God's discipline is not because he's angry or upset, but because he loves us. And I want to encourage you later to go look at Hebrews chapter 12, verses 7 through 11, that talks about God disciplines you because he loves you. That's exactly what it says. And if he's not disciplining you when you mess up, you must not really be his child. So it's a kind of a self-examination, and it says that God's discipline is always for our good, so that we might be able to share in his holiness. The last part of chapter 2 starts talking about happiness, blessedness. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom, the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit is better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Does that bring a little song in your mind that we've sung in here before? And it talks about long life and pleasantness and peace. Verse 18, she's the tree of life. This is talking about wisdom. The tree of life to those who lay hold of her. And those who hold her fast are called blessed. Verse 19, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding, he established the heavens. By his knowledge, the deeps broke open and the clouds dropped down the dew. So we see that it is through God's wisdom that everything that was created was through his wisdom. And in the New Testament and in Colossians, we see that wisdom is a person, that it's Jesus. Then it talks about, in this next section, talks about being kind and generous to others. Verse 27 says, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, and when it is in your power to do it. Don't withhold good from someone. If they deserve good, give them what is good. Don't withhold it. And it goes on to talk about some neighborly principles of being kind to your neighbors. And then it says, the last verse, the wise will inherit honor, but fools get disgrace. So we see that antithetical, that's what I'm talking about, parallelism there. The wise inherit honor, fools get disgrace. Then we get to chapter 4, and it talks about how to acquire wisdom. O son, hear, O sons, a father's instruction, be attentive that you might gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments, and live and live. Get wisdom, he says. Get insight. Do not forget. Verse 6, do not forsake her, and she'll keep you and love you and guard you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. And whatever you get insight. Then it says, go ahead and prize that wisdom, because that wisdom will exalt you, honor you, embrace you. It'll be like placing a garland, a winter's wreath around your head. She'll bestow on you a beautiful crown. Then in verses 10 through 19, it's like avoid bad company. And we've all had that talk with our kids, haven't we? If you're a parent or a grandparent, hey, watch who you hang out with, because that's who you're going to start acting like, is whoever you're spending the most time with. So he says, you've been taught the way of wisdom, so remember it. Take hold of it. Don't let go. Verse 10, do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it. Pass on it. Verse 17, don't eat the bread of wickedness or drink the wine of violence. So the warnings are there. Then in verse 20, it says, my son, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Don't let them escape your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them and healing to their flesh. And over, we're going to see that expression of how wonderful it is to be wise, that it's good to the bone. It makes you good to the very essence of your health when you make wise decisions. Verse 24, put away your crooked speech and put devious talk far from you. Again, we're going to see more about the tongue in Proverbs in the weeks to come. It's a big deal. What we say, our words are a big deal. So it's saying, put away the crooked speech, put away devious talk. In the New Testament, Paul writes this in Ephesians 4:29. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear. So our words should be helpful, encouraging, healing. If I tied every New Testament verse to Proverbs that goes along with it, we would be here till next Wednesday. There are so many. So I'm just periodically throwing one in here or there. In chapter 5, it says it's about avoiding lust, avoiding immoral women, being discreet in what you say and do. It says, verse 3, for the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she's as bitter as wormwood, as sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways wander, and she does not know it. So he goes, so sons, listen to me. Keep far from her, verse 8. Don't go near the door of her house. Down in verse 15, he's uttering more. He says, drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Well, what do you think that means? Drink from your own cistern. Don't be putting your bucket in somebody else's well, okay? Not good. Not good. Verse 18. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. A lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times. Be intoxicated always in her love. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For the man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and ponders all his paths. God sees everything. God sees all that we're doing, all that we're thinking. And this doesn't really just apply to men. This is to women also. Our ways are before his eyes. We might be able to hide things from our spouse or our family or our employer or our neighbors, but we can hide nothing from God. So let's be doing what is right. Verse 23 says, he dies, this is one of the fools, wicked fools, he dies for lack of discipline. And because of his great folly, he is led astray. Wow. So he's saying, don't be a fool. It ends in destruction. That foolishness leads to destruction. So don't go astray. Wise up. Wise up, people. Get wisdom. Here it is, written in our own language, portable, readable, learnable, knowledgeable. Let's use it. Oh, Lord God, we thank you so much for your word, that it is living and powerful, that it is life-changing and applicable. Oh, God, we pray that you would bless all of those who are watching us online, all of those who are in this place. May you bless them. May you protect them. May you give all of us wisdom and knowledge. May you, Lord, may we receive your discipline when we get off track and be drawn back to you and into your love, that you loved us so much. You gave your only Son, that we don't have to die, that through him we can have life everlasting. And it is in that name, the name of Jesus, that we pray. Amen.